the Florida Writer Podcast, a discussion about writing and other things.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Allison Nissen. Today, I am lucky enough to have with me McKenzie Cassidy. McKenzie, could you give us a 60-second elevator pitch about who you are and what you write?
Sure. I am a writer and a father and a teacher. That's kind of the way I describe myself on some of my social media handles. In terms of writing, I have, background. My original background was in journalism, and I transitioned over to fiction. I still do also write some journalism and some kind of marketing writing. I am a father of two children, a 6-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl. And I'm also a teacher. So after getting my MFA from Wilkes University in Pennsylvania and being fortunate enough to publish my first book, I've been able to be an adjunct professor at a couple of different institutions. So that's about me.
McKenzie, you sound like a very busy person. Let's talk about the first novel that you have, Here Lies a Father. What inspired you to write this?
So the story is loosely based on my real life, very loosely based because pretty much most of the events of the plot are made up. When I was a teenager, I found out basically that my father, who I was never really close with, and who was kind of in and out of our lives, had also two other families that we had never heard about. And it was a pretty big shocker. And so we kind of lived with it for a few years. And then my father, who was pretty secretive, eventually died when I was in my early 20s of cancer, which was kind of unexpected as well, because none of us really knew that he was sick. And so those events kind of, implanted a seed in my brain that, over the next decade, I really wanted to write kind of a story about it. And originally, my idea was to write a memoir because I was reading, a lot of these famous memoirs about people's lives, and I really enjoyed them. And I said, I'm going to write a memoir. When I started, I went to my MFA program in Wilkes University because I wanted, help. I wanted to refine my skills, and I wanted to work with a mentor, and I wanted to be part of a writing community. And when I started as a memoir, and I had a really hard time writing it because, I was so focused on getting all the details right and being 100% accurate. Some of that was my journalism background. And then as I was writing and working with my mentor, she kind of started convincing me that, hey, maybe you should just write this as a novel to kind of free yourself up creatively. And so once I started doing that, the words started to flow, and then I was able to fill in a lot of the gaps and kind of really make a great story that ended up being more of a novel. And so the book as it is today, it's probably about 75% fiction, 25% nonfiction from my life. So I would draw on little things of my life, but then, kind of add to them in this fictionalized world. But these were definitely, the inspiration was definitely from my real life originally. And then it kind of took on a world of its own.
All right, I have like a million questions.
Okay, that's good.
But first of all, what a crazy story. That's a crazy upbringing. I'm going to start with that.
It is. Yeah. No, it is definitely a crazy upbringing. And some of that is, some of it's in the book, but then a lot of the other stuff in the book is made up, and I kind of came from a kind of a wild, crazy family anyway. So a lot of that is part of the story, and I read a lot of these books to prepare for writing. I read a lot of books that had similar kind of characters, characters who were male and teenagers and sometimes female too. Like some of the first ones I read was, like Running with Scissors, which was a great memoir. And then The Glass Castle, which is another great memoir. And those were kind of the beginnings. And then I did kind of incorporate some of my family stories into that, but not too many.
Is the main character your father figure or you? or you're like a teenage boy?
The main character is a teenage boy, but the problem is when a lot of people read the book, they assume that it's me. And I think in the beginning it was because it was a memoir, right? So in a memoir, you're trying to put yourself or the younger version of yourself on the page. But I think as I switched over to fiction and started giving myself permission to be really creative with it, the main character kind of drifted a little bit. So it's not really me, but it has elements of me. So I kind of was able to like take what I wanted for the story and then leave the rest. And so, in many ways, yeah, he is kind of a mirror of me, but not. And then a lot of it's made up. And so he is 15, and when he finds out, well, basically in the beginning of the story, he's 15, and he's going to attend his father's funeral with his sister, and they show up to the small town and they go to the cemetery, and then they meet these other members of their father's family who they've never met before because their father was very secretive and didn't share anything about his life. And then that's when they reveal basically that, he had been married two other times and had these other children who were their half siblings. The rest of the book is kind of the character, kind of discovering the truth, coming to terms with the truth, change it really evolving the way that he thinks about his family and his life.
So developing this narrator that you have, or this protagonist, sounds like he's got a lot of turmoil, which of course creates a very rich character when you have conflict, when you have that much conflict and unexpected conflict. So how does this create a reliable character, an unreliable character? How does that develop?
Yeah, so his character, or his name's Ian Daly, and the character is an unreliable narrator. And I actually didn't know much about this concept when I started, at my MFA program. My mentor, Kaylee Jones, was really a big fan of unreliable narrators. And she's like, this would be a perfect situation to try that. And this character would fit, perfectly into that mold. So besides writing the novel, I spent a lot of time reading a lot of examples of classic literature that featured unreliable narrators. So, we started with Huck Finn and worked our way up, through Catcher in the Rye, through This Boy's Life by Tobias Wolff. And then some of the other ones that didn't necessarily feature a teenage protagonist, but still had a great use of the unreliable narrator. So, examples of that were Remains of the Day, which is, a fabulous book with an unreliable narrator. Some of the newer books like Silver Linings Playbook had an unreliable narrator. And so I studied a lot of these books just to learn how those writers did it, what craft they used, how they structured the stories, how they made the character respond to things happening in his environment. And then I kind of, read their books and took their examples and tried to apply it to my own character. And I think it came out pretty good. And the unreliable narrator is difficult to do because you have three parts of it. So you have the the author, who is me, and then you have the main character who's not really me, but a mix of me. And then you have the reader. And so the author and the reader, they know what's happening. They know that there are these lies and that the main character doesn't know the lies yet. But you have to write it in a way where the main character believes in the lies, but they don't know it yet. So it can be pretty challenging to do. And I spent probably about 5 years total of writing and revising the book. And and then when it came out in January, and we really had some awesome reviews. I never really used Catcher in the Rye. I mean, I've read Catcher in the Rye a couple of times. It was never one of my major inspirations for this book. But, we had someone from Kirkus Reviews basically compare the main character to Holden Caulfield, which was a huge compliment. And, after all that hard work, we were really happy with the way that the book turned out.
I really want to talk about the title of the novel itself. So Here Lies a Father. And the word lie can mean two different things because it starts at the funeral, but he's also been lying about his life. I assume that was intentional.
Yes. And it was sort of like, it was sort of a spark of inspiration, because I went through a couple of different titles when I started it. And then the last title I can remember was that it was called The House That Lying Built. That was my like working title. And then I think about a year or two into my revisions, so maybe like the second or the third year within my 5 years of writing it, I don't remember what happened exactly, but this title suddenly like popped in my brain about Here Lies a Father. And I loved it because I'm like, it has multiple meanings. It's not only is it going to make people think about death, you know, like an inscription on a tombstone, but it's also going to, represent the idea of the father lying to the family over all those years about his life and about what he had done in the past. So I kind of loved like the dual nature of that title, and it completely just surfaced in my brain. I mean, it may have been a dream. It may have, I don't even remember. It just popped in there one day, and I loved it so much that I went with it right away, because titles can be tricky for sure.
Yes, titles can be tricky for sure. And then when you have the perfect one, it just fits like that last piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. Like once that surfaced in my brain, I was like, that's it. And then I never thought about the title ever again. It was just settled. And it was just one of those things that like, lightning strikes, and that was it. I can't explain it.
Before you went to your MFA program, you were a journalist.
Correct. I actually studied political science in college. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, but I liked the news. I liked current events. I liked my civics classes in high school. So I studied political science and for a few years. And then when I got out, I kind of went into journalism because I also like to write. And so I spent probably about 4 or 5 years writing for like medium-sized newspapers down here in Southwest Florida, in Fort Myers and Cape Coral. And that was really awesome. And I'm really glad that it wasn't a very high paying job. And as you know, like, reporters as an industry, journalism as industry is in trouble. But I'm really so glad that I did it, because it gave me, 4 or 5 years of just nonstop writing. I mean, I was writing a couple of stories a day, or, longer stories on the weekend. And I would go out, interview people, and have a chance to describe what I saw. And it was really like an awesome training for becoming a writer. And I think I got that idea from reading something, I think, by Ernest Hemingway, who, was talking about how he started off, as a reporter, and how that really helped him develop as a writer, and just, being able to write clearly and make sense before he jumped into like fiction writing. And I think it's a great training ground for anybody who wants to be any kind of writer, because you're forced to write every day, and, really, and then edit, and just kind of become better and improve as you go.
McKenzie, this has been a fantastic conversation. I am so excited to look up your novel and discover more. Again, from the very beginning, I have lots of questions, so I'm sure the novel will give me lots of answers.
Hopefully. I mean, I have had people have read it and been like, well, I still have a bunch of questions. So it does resolve some of those things, but then it leaves a lot also to wonder, especially what happens to the main character. At the end, a lot of people wonder how the rest of his life is, but it's something I guess you'll just have to imagine.
Well, that's the trick for an unreliable narrator. You can never really know what's going to happen, because you're not 100% sure of where the truth falls.
Exactly. And I think the big part of the book was an evolution. So he did change. Every character needs that dramatic arc to change by the end of the book. Otherwise, it's not interesting. And the character does change. And so the character makes a commitment by the end of the book that he's going to be more honest with his life, and he's going to challenge these examples of dishonesty in his family. So he like makes the commitment to do it, but at the same time, things are incremental. Like it's not it's not going to happen overnight, so it's going to take him all years, or even the rest of his life, to change. But it's a good ending, so you do know that he's going to, things are going to be okay, but you're not really 100% sure what happens to him at the end.
I love it. I love endings like that, where they're satisfactory, yet you want more. McKenzie, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, I'm on social media. Obviously, you have to be these days. So I have a Facebook page, which is at Here Lies a Father, to make it easy. And also on Instagram at Here Lies a Father. And I'm on Twitter, but that one is just my name. And my handle is MT_Cassidy. But if you just search my name, you can find me on Twitter. And I do have a website, McKenzieCassidy.com. But a lot of that website I use for some of my freelance marketing stuff. But I do have a book section there, and I have a contact section if anybody wants to email me or ask anything.
All right. Well, McKenzie, are you ready to switch to our rapid fire questions?
Sure. It sounds fun. Let's do it.
All right. Let's do it. That's right. What gets you excited in the morning?
Oh, that's so easy. A cup of coffee. It's the first thing I have to do. We set our coffee the night before, and then we wake up at around, 6 or something. And we have to get the kids ready for school, which is very difficult because, they're in first grade and preschool. So I have to come downstairs and immediately drink at least one cup of coffee, and then I'll have another one. And then I feel like I'm then good enough and normal enough to take the kids to school and then start working. And recently, besides the coffee, I've also been participating in this really awesome program called the London Writers Hour, where it's like a Zoom link, and you go in and you just spend an hour writing nonstop with with a large group of writers. And it's just a way to keep you focused on, the process and make sure you're doing it every day. So that's been good too.
Do you have any crazy babysitting stories?
My kids are always kind of crazy. They have a lot of energy, and they're very imaginative, and they're always doing things around the house, like, building forts or pulling all their toys out and doing, wild things with that, or being crazy. They really keep me on my toes, and I'm pretty tired most of the time. And I've started writing again to work on a new project, but it's slow going because just the circumstances of my life. And then of course, last year with the pandemic, things have been kind of crazy, but I'm actually getting back into writing. But yeah, I can't think of any specific example with my kids, but they're just kind of crazy all the time. So I have to deal with that.
And have you ever had a treehouse?
I've never personally had a treehouse, but I always wanted one. And I knew of so I grew up in upstate New York in a really small town, and I knew some other kids who had one, but it was never like a nice one that you would order now. Like if you see people with them, it almost looks like a real house was built, a luxury house. Like back, when I was growing up, somebody would just get, a flat mismatched piece of plywood and just nail it to a couple of trees and then climb up to the top and hang out there. And it was really unsafe, and it could have broken and killed people at any moment. But that's kind of what we did, because I was a child of the 80s and 90s. So we risked our lives all the time. But I always wanted one. And I remember climbing in ones that people had just made that were awful and really dangerous. But I never personally had one.
Well, McKenzie Cassidy, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you so much for having me.
You have been listening to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Allison Nissen. Allison out. McKenzie Cassidy is a writer, journalist, marketer, and professor living in Fort Myers, Florida. His work has appeared in the anthology Walk Hand in Hand into Extinction, stories inspired by True Detective, Flash Fiction Magazine, Florida Weekly, and in multiple newspapers throughout Southwest Florida. He holds an MFA from Wilkes University and is a regular blogger for the Florida Writers Association. Here Lies a Father is his first novel. Learn more at McKenzieCassidy.com. For more information on the Florida Writers Association,
Visit us on the web at floridawriters.org.